On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa vanished. The last person to see him reported he had second thoughts about doing business with the man. But when he turned around, the Teamsters boss was gone. Was it the Mafia or a government conspiracy? Today, we look at 3 theories. Then you decide what really happened to America's most powerful labor leader. For 3 decades, Jimmy Hoffa ruled the Teamsters Union with an iron fist. He made truckers rich, but rubbed many of the wrong people the wrong way. When he met his demise, the feds suspected the Mafia. But could there be more to the story? And how could this case still be unsolved after all these years? The year is 1957. The place, a sweltering Chicago. The stakes, total control of the Teamsters Union. A power struggle is underway. On one side is Jimmy Hoffa, the charismatic leader of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, and on the other are the heads of the Chicago Mafia. It's them or us. Either Jimmy will take control of the union, or the mob will destroy him. Now, for context, the Teamsters were the most powerful labor union in America. For decades, they had been loyal allies to the Mafia, and if the mob controlled the union, it would mean total domination of the lucrative trucking industry. Now, in hindsight, we know that Jimmy won that battle back then. But when the smoke cleared, he was finished. After serving time in prison for jury tampering and mail fraud, Jimmy returned to the Union in 1964. But the mob never forgave him for going to jail because of them. Now, Jimmy tried to make amends. In fact, he courted the mob, meeting with bosses in secret. But things didn't go well. There was too much bad blood. So in 1967, Jimmy started to flex the union's muscle, targeting mob-owned businesses. For example, he called for a boycott against Liggett and Meyer, a tobacco company owned by the Genovese crime family. Soon after, the death threats started pouring in. Now, the union had its own security force, the largest private investigation team in America. They intercepted threatening phone calls and followed suspects, but no one knew who to trust, and that led to panic. By 1968, the situation was spiraling out of control. The Teamsters were spending thousands on body armor and bulletproof cars. There were even rumors of a mob-hit squad moving across the country. Fearful for his life, Jimmy went into hiding. That same year, he agreed to meet with 3 mob bosses in a Detroit motel room. 2 men from the Buffalo crime family and 1 from the Chicago outfit. Was he there to negotiate peace? Or was it a trap? Well, the meeting ended in disaster. An FBI informant overheard the mob bosses plotting to whack Hoffa. The Bureau lost the tape, but luckily some of the conversation was captured on another wiretap. In 1969, Jimmy was indicted for bribery and extortion. But with the mob breathing down his neck, he had an ace up his sleeve. Hoffa went to the mat against the mob. He testified against them in court, exposing their illegal activities. In doing so, he survived the first attempt on his life. However, he was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But while locked up, Jimmy continued to fight. He launched a campaign to depose the mob from the union. He expelled mob-backed union leaders and started to clean house. But he didn't realize the long reach of the Mafia. They might not be able to touch him inside the prison walls, but once he stepped outside again, well, that was a whole other story. Fast forward to 1971. Jimmy has served his prison sentence, but he's still not safe. Someone tries to bomb his car. 4 years later, he's walking the streets of Detroit, still afraid for his life. Then in 1975, a fateful meeting takes place. On July, Jimmy meets with 2 Mafia soldiers. Their names were Anthony Giacalone and Anthony Provenzano. The 3 meet at a restaurant in New Jersey. But we don't know why. Maybe it was another attempt at peace. Or maybe Jimmy was setting a trap of his own. We'll never know. All we know is that the last person to see Jimmy alive left that meeting in a hurry. The mysterious 3rd man had second thoughts about doing business with Jimmy Hoffa, but when he turned around, he was gone. Today, that meeting has become a thing of legend. But before we get into 3 theories about what happened next, Let's look at some background on these two men. Anthony J. Provenzano was a Mafia soldier in the Genovese crime family. Born in 1913, he became a labor lawyer, representing the interests of the Teamsters Union. But his true allegiance was to the mob. When the feds brought charges against Hoffa, Provenzano was there to defend him, secretly working to keep the Teamsters under the thumb of the Mafia. Years later, he'd be convicted of racketeering, but that was just a small part of his criminal enterprise. The second man was Anthony Giallo. He was born in 1911 and rose through the ranks of the Lucchese crime family. He became a capo, overseeing gambling and loan sharking. But like Provenzano, he had a reputation for labor racketeering, forcing unions to hire his associates and pay illegal fees. And now, on July 30th, 1975, the two men meet with Hoffa in a Jersey restaurant. They discuss an upcoming Teamsters convention, hoping to influence Hoffa's decision. But what happens next is anybody's guess. After leaving the restaurant, Provenzano was tailed by the FBI. At 3:30 p.m., they lost him. They believed he entered Giants Stadium, home of the New York Football Giants. Now, this is where things start getting strange. Before the stadium was demolished in 2010, a reporter claimed that beneath the bleachers lay Jimmy Hoffa's body. We're talking about a man who had a huge following in New Jersey. If he were dead, wouldn't the mob have wanted to hide his body far away from prying eyes? Sure, but remember, Tony Provenzano was a mobster. He had no problem committing murder. In fact, he was linked to several killings. Why not add one more to his rap sheet? In the decades since, there have been numerous searches of the stadium, including one with ground-penetrating radar. Yet nothing has ever turned up. But here's the kicker. In 2017, the New York Daily News published a bombshell. An anonymous source told them that mobsters buried Hoffa under Giants Stadium. Not only that, but a former hitman for the Genovese crime family, Mike Francis, corroborated the story. In fact, according to the source, Hoffa wasn't alone. Two other mobsters were killed and buried in the same spot. This brings us to our first theory. Theory 1. Frank Sheeran's confession. In 2004, a documentary was released. It was called I Heard You Paint Houses, and in it, a hitman named Frank Sheeran confessed to killing Hoffa. But how reliable is this confession? Well, according to Sheeran, he was close personal friends with Hoffa. But once the Teamsters boss was out of prison, he cut Sheeran out of his inner circle. To make matters worse, Hoffa was humiliating Sheeran in public. Something had to be done. So, in 1975, Sheeran confronted Hoffa. The two argued. Then Sheeran lost his temper and punched Hoffa in the face. That's when Hoffa vowed revenge. And soon after, Sheeran was whacked. He claims he acted alone, but he also says he was hired by Anthony Giacalone, aka Tony the Greek. According to Sheeran, the plan was simple. The Greek would set up a meeting with Hoffa, then Sheeran would kill him and dump his body in a remote location. According to Sheeran, that's exactly what happened. However, there are many holes in his story. First off, Sheeran was in Michigan at the time of Hoffa's disappearance. Second, he said he was paid $1 million to kill Hoffa. But to date, no such payment has been found. Third, there's the matter of credibility. Sheeran wasn't exactly known for telling the truth. In fact, he changed his story several times. Plus, he had a motive for shifting the blame to mobsters. By portraying himself as a fall guy, he could paint himself as a good guy. And that brings us to our second theory. Theory 2. The Giants Stadium Theory. If you ask Anthony Provenzano, Jimmy Hoffa is dead. He was killed and buried under Giants Stadium. But, unfortunately, that doesn't help us much. Why would the mob bury him there? Sure, it's secluded, but there are hundreds of other places to hide a body. So let's take a deeper look at the evidence. In 1976, a former mobster named Joseph Valaki testified before a grand jury. He claimed that Hoffa was indeed dead. His body was buried under Giants Stadium. The prosecution followed up with a search, but came up empty-handed. Then, in 1982, another tip came in. This time from a reformed mobster named Michael Francis. Once again, the authorities searched the stadium, but no remains were found. However, in 2004, the Daily News published new evidence. A radar scan showed something unusual beneath the parking lot. Could it be a coffin? Unfortunately, the image was inconclusive. Our third theory involves the government. Theory 3: CIA involvement. In 2011, a Freedom of Information Act request revealed some damning documents. They were from the Central Intelligence Agency, and in them, references were made to a valuable Teamsters informant. But can this really mean that Jimmy Hoffa was working for the CIA? Well, the documents don't say anything concrete, but given the timing, it makes you wonder. In 1976, for example, one document referred to the Teamsters boss as a, quote, sensitive national security asset. Another referred to a program that protected him. Clearly, the CIA knew something the public didn't. Was Jimmy Hoffa a spy? Well, according to biographer Arnold de Fangfa, the Teamsters boss had extensive ties to Israel. He was willing to use the Union's vast resources to support the Jewish state, and that made him very valuable to the CIA. Plus, think about the logistics. The Mafia couldn't touch Hoffa inside prison, but once he was free, they were waiting for him. Surely the agency was aware of this. But why would they leave him unprotected? Well, that's anybody's guess, but to this day, this is one of the leading theories about what really happened to Jimmy Hoffa. We've covered a lot of ground, but let's hear from a professional. Historian Anthony Romeo is here to dissect the evidence. Yeah, so the Mafia had a history of violence and Hoffa was a high-profile target. He had extensive ties to organized crime, but he also crossed them in several ways, so they definitely had the motive and opportunity to kill him. But there's one big question. Where's the body? Even after multiple searches of Giant Stadium, nothing was ever found. If he was buried there, it seems like the mob did a great job of hiding his remains. Plus, we have to consider the logistics. Even if Hoffa was killed, why would the Mafia immediately think to bury him there? Wouldn't they have had more time to come up with a plan? And what about the CIA documents? Could there be something to those? Well, it's hard to say. CIA officials deny any wrongdoing and claim Hoffa was never an asset. But given the agency's history of deception, can we really believe that? In the end, it's impossible to say for sure what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. There are lots of theories and plenty of evidence to go around. But one thing is for sure, this is America's greatest unsolved mystery. So, what do you think? How do you think Jimmy Hoffa died? Let me know in the comments section below. Before you go, please subscribe and remember to stay tuned for more content. And, as always, thanks for watching. Here's another couple videos you might enjoy.